I'm Earth Oliver. I'm a retoucher from Portland, Oregon, and today we're going to be retouching some beer photography. This includes glasses, bottles, liquid splashes, all sorts of fun stuff, and we're just going to be flying through these things. I'm going to show you some tricks and tips along the way, just get you kind of on top of these things so that you can have fun with them. Let's dive right into the first one. And I'm gonna go through these notes that were given to me by the photographer. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Right up, we have a round glass for urban chestnut. We've got two exposures. One is for the beer body, and that's all of this down here, including the stem and the base. And our other exposure is for the beer head. First thing I like to do when I get raw images is I'm not just gonna hit process and spit this thing out like that. I'm gonna go ahead and crop this thing down to get rid of a lot of distractions that aren't gonna be necessary. I can put this on a new canvas later on. I noticed that it's a little bit off center and it needs to get rotated. This is a vertical alignment, so using the normal rotate tool is a little bit of a pain. I think I'm just gonna have to arrow it in a little bit. There we go. That's looking real straight to me. If I need to test, I can just pop this down the center and perfect, that looks great. Next, I wanna just run through a few quick settings in Capture. Not a big fan of their threshold. I usually put that down at 0.2. I'm gonna extend my dynamic range just a bit to give myself a little bit more latitude as I work. I think the exposure is looking good. We're only focusing on the beer body right now, not the beer head. So just real quick, I wanna sync these two files up. Just like that. You can see a little bit different exposure. I like the brightness up here, but I may as well just pull it down a tiny bit to match it, and then it'll allow me to potentially just use one curve for the whole thing rather than having to mask out the head and curve both separately. We'll see what happens when we get there. Other than that, I think this is looking really good, and I am just going to go ahead and process these files out, bring them into Bridge, and go on to the next step of this project. All right. As you can see, I've got my files up in Bridge. If you don't use Bridge, start today. It's a great tool to have. It's part of any good photographer's and retoucher's workflow. I want to stack these two images up real quick, and I'm just going to go to my Tools menu, Photoshop, load into layers. That's going to fly over to here. I'm going to get both those layers I just processed out as their own individual layer with the file name already plugged in. First thing I want to do is create that composite which Rob had shot for me of the head. Before I do that, actually, looks like there may have been a tiny bit of movement somewhere, and I'm going to go to a difference blend mode. Hopefully a lot of you already know this trick. We're just looking at the difference between two layers to create an alignment that is down to the pixel. Anything that's not similar is going to change colors, and all points of similarity in the image are going to turn black. So with that done, that looks like it's lining up to me. A little bit of movement, but that's to be expected because it's a different head. So with that done, I'm going to go ahead and add one head to the other by creating an inverted mask, and just really quickly with a normal old brush, we're gonna paint this other exposure on. I'm gonna go ahead and exaggerate my mask. As you can see, it cut down a little bit further simply because it's easier for me to mask this way than the other way. That's my preference. You might have your own, but that's mine. One thing I want to do with this is just kind of see the difference between these two exposures, see what's happening. seeing if there's anything else that I want to bring in for my top exposure. I think we're okay. You know, these little lines down here are kind of bugging me, but I'm just going to retouch those out in a few minutes. Or I can just, you know, I could subtly bring that in if I wanted to. Check this out. I'm using a low flow brush and I am just painting in the other exposure, but you know what? It's a little bit darker and I feel like it's just adding an unnecessary shape to the side of the glass. So I'm gonna pop back through my history, undo that, worry about these things later. I'm gonna give you plenty of stuff to do on your own. And next thing we need to do is yank this thing off the background. I could just come in with a quick select tool and do that. Not the end of the world. It's gonna give me some bad edges around here though. So I think what I wanna do is what I love doing, I really don't. Pull out my paths, pull out my pen tool, and just whip around this thing and give myself a really nice clean edge. Get rid of the background, add some color, do a little cleanup, and let's move on to the next one. So as you can see, I got a mask cut. I'm not gonna be going over the finer points of masking and pathing. That takes a little while, takes lots of practice. There are a couple tutorials I just made that go really in depth to pathing, part of a beverage tutorial. Check them out if you want. There's so many resources out there for pathing, and hopefully you already know the path and the mask backwards and forwards. So with that said, what I'd like to do is group up these two layers I just made. I'm not gonna bother with some file names or folder names right now, simply because this is a simple composite. So I've got a path here, and I'm just gonna select it and add it to the group, bam. I'm gonna put a solid color in the background, so I just have something nicer to look at than a checkerboard. We'll put that behind, and we're ready to do a little bit of color and then some cleanup. Sometimes it's better to do cleanup before color, but in this case, I just want to see this thing sparkle. Not a whole lot of color to do, so we can first, as I just noticed, I didn't make a perfect path up here because this is slightly non-uniform, and I would like to just use a brush. And so I'm actually going to delete this like that, and instead I'm just going to turn it into a selection. Make sure my feather radius is pretty low, and then add the mask that way. So reason being, I need to clean it up right here. And to do that, I'm just gonna quickly paint out the head with a normal old brush. Some of you may want to do this with pen tool. I personally love using a brush for masks, and you don't even have to be precise. We could also pull some channels. You know, I think we've got some okay separation there, but we are going instead to just use our brush. So bear with me for just a sec. It's not gonna be perfect. It's just gonna be what it is. It takes a few minutes to really cut the perfect mask. But I just wanna get that background out of the way so that when I add some color, some weird optical things aren't gonna be happening. Like that. You notice I'm on a dark background, so I get some weird edges, but this isn't a bad mask. It's actually the edge of the glass. There's just a little bit of a highlight there. So that's done. Now I can get my background back up to 98. There we go. This is intended to be on white, so you really want to look at it on white. If you are feeling a little cramped, we can always expand the canvas out a tiny bit, no biggie. And looks like a little masking down there I need to clean up. So I've got my group, it's my glass, I've got my base layers. I'd like to create a color correction group, and we're just gonna do a quick little bit of curving. I just wanna pop this foam up a little bit. I switch between my mouse and my pen quite a bit because that's just how I work. So getting a little bit more lively head on this thing. I don't think I can curve both at the same time because they need a slightly different maneuver. And we're gonna just see what we have to work with here. Check out where my values are, somewhere over there. This will give me a little bit more contrast. Doesn't really need much. I like the color of it. And with that done, I'm gonna go ahead and use the mask I had made before to create my head mask. Pretty quick, pretty easy. I guess I could have clipped this into this and done this, and then killed that, and then just called this head, right? Then it's all contained all at one time. I change things as I go, no biggie. For my base, I think I want to give it a little bit more life and a tiny bit more contrast. But the issue with this one is that I'm gaining a whole bunch of saturation. So I'm going to change that to luminosity. Now I can have a little bit more freedom in curving without all that saturation gain. There we go. That's looking real good. Got some distractions over there, and I'm going to take a quick look at what I want to do about that. In the meantime, this was all a feathered edge. If you want to, soften that up to match the feather, just come in with a feathered brush or load your path as a selection with a feather and use that as a guide. But if that's bugging you, you can do something like that. All right, before I proceed any further, I just want to pop up here and save this thing off. It's called Fantasyland, not sure why. So we'll keep that file name. Fantasy, and who knows, we could have lots of versions. I'm gonna put this in front. Okay, now I feel safe. And I think I'm gonna dive into a little bit of cleanup. As you may or may not know, this is a little bit tricky in here. I did put some color adjustment layers down below, which I probably shouldn't have. Like I said, I'm working fast and loose here. Not always the best way to do it. So I'm actually going to change things up, and you're gonna see why. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna put this into my CC. I'm gonna put this back on it. I'm gonna dupe this back down. I know, I'm a nut. And take this out. This is actually gonna go up into my CC. It's gonna take this mask and I'm gonna invert it so it's only applying to that area. Now I have just a CC, which is my color correction. I've got my head and my body. That's fine. Can't see a thing. So here comes a cool trick. You've probably heard of this technique before, and I'm gonna show you a little bit of a twist. What we're gonna do is I'm going to frequency separate a beer in a glass shot. It's not skin, it's not pores, it's not eyebrow hair, it's beer. And for my frequency separation, I'm gonna use a script that I wrote that we're calling it Frequency Separation 2.0. I just did a whole bunch of amazing tutorials, really digging into this technique, kind of going into the history of it, explaining it fully, showing how it's used on all sorts of different surfaces, and just doing some amazing reconstructions. So if you're really interested in this process, check out that tutorial. A friend of mine, Seth, also has a good tutorial doing it on apparel, skin, all sorts of stuff. And his is available too. It's fantastic. So for my frequency setup, I like to use median. I'm gonna zoom in here, see what's going on, get my numbers where I want them, go through that, get rid of this, come back, and get my high pass, my high frequency ready. So that's done. And I'm just going to really quickly, I don't know what this is, but it's freaking cool. It's like a single bubble. This wasn't a 20-second exposure, and it's the same bubble on a trajectory out the side of the glass. I have no idea where that came from, but it's weird, anomalous. Okay, so issue with all this is I've got stripes and bubbles that need to go together, and I don't want to create any sort of stripes that don't seem natural. So I'm going to be cloning from lots of different sources and just really trying to maintain the integrity of the carbonated structure of this stuff here. So doing that, because I know that was a big thing over there, into this side. And when you do this for long enough, you learn what to look for. I'm using a solarized curve on top to help myself visualize where a lot of the flaws are. So don't want to talk too much about this. It's a lot of explaining, a lot of math, a lot of rocket science. It's not, it's really simple. So I think this reflection was, yeah, undesirable. I'm just gonna take this out really fast. And I know it may seem confusing that I'm not working on an image anymore, but I am. So almost done. There we go. I think there's something there, but I know it's gonna be difficult to get rid of. So some of these scratches can go. See if I can clean this whole glass in 10 minutes, whereas in years past, maybe this would take an hour because there's all sorts of delicate structures underneath. Even with the healing brush, it would be a bit of a nightmare. So that one, check this out. Yep, that one's gonna go. I think I've got a little scratch there. And there's a lot of stuff up at the top, all these little guys. I'm not gonna do them all because I'd like you to give it a shot, see how you would get rid of. These are just like gaps in the paint. Usually when they silk screen these things on, or whatever the fancy way is that they do that, there's just some imperfections. So I think I've got this where I want it just about. Maybe this little bit on the side can get cleaned up. That's looking pretty cool. I didn't check out the base, so got a few refractions and things happening. A little bit of glass flaw down here. That one I want to take out. We can turn this back on. There's always a seam in glassware. It's just how construction of these things works. So clean that up. One in front too. I'm not really worried about what this really is right now because I know what it should be. And maybe on the next one, I'll do this process slightly differently so you can see what's going on. But for this one, I just felt like doing it this way. Okay. Got my high frequency layer clean. I'm gonna go ahead and go back to normal, check out what I just done, maybe clean up some areas that I wasn't paying any attention to. That one's a little bit tricky. Get back to it in a second. I'll give you a quick preview of all that. You can see there's still a bunch of stuff on the surface, but here we are getting rid of things that are in the high frequency domain that I know I'm gonna wanna get rid of. All that work right there, I didn't have to match the underlying gradients in either the healing tool or the clone tool. I could just freely go through all of that, paying very little attention to what I was doing and just attacking a bunch of stray pixels. Okay, cool. With that done, I'm gonna go down to the low layer and I'm gonna get rid of all these larger forms. Gonna use a healing brush on a big diffusion setting, and we're just gonna get rid of what was underneath all of the high frequency layer that we just retouched. And larger forms, kind of, sometimes you have to go back and forth to see what you're actually looking at. I'm only looking at the low right now, and you know, just breaking up some of these stripes that are in here. Doesn't have to be perfect, just needs to be cleaned up a little bit. These are actually the shadows from that weird little bubble that was trying to run away. There we go. There's a lot of sediment in here that I'm seeing too. All this stuff down here is just kind of sediment. I don't want to smooth that out. Okay, so with that done, I'm gonna fix this little thing down here that I noticed before. Maybe push that away. Check out what's happening. Deal with that. Stamp tool. Get rid of that little doodad. I think I'm just gonna low flow this one down. That's okay. This is just a little bit of visual surface noise here. That doesn't need to be there. I'm not gonna make it perfect. I just wanna kind of show you my process. You know, if I wanna come down here and I want to, you know, just, I can even just take a normal brush and boop, paint that away. You can see there's still some things down there, plenty for you to clean up and play with, but that's looking a lot closer to the way I imagined it. You know, little weird cleanups here. I can just go on my high frequency and just say goodbye to this kind of stuff. Not even worrying about the underlying color. It's a dream come true. All right, with that done, I think I like what I see here. I've got my color controls. I've got my glass cut out on whites. It's off center, it's okay. I can just push this over to here, put it on a nice clean canvas. If I felt like it, I could add a little bit of tone, something like that. Make those whites in the internals pop off. You know, play around, make it look the way you want it to. That's just my quick down and dirty. And with that said, we're gonna jump into the next one.